the head of European football, just called the World Cup boring. Not in a private meeting. Not in a leaked conversation. Not behind closed doors where nobody could hear it. On record. Out loud. While the tournament was already live, and within hours. Not days. Hours. 13 countries, playing in this very World Cup, came together and fired back with a joint statement that pulled absolutely nothing. This is not a disagreement between two suits in an office somewhere. This is a full-scale war. Breaking out in real time. In public. On the biggest stage football has ever built. And the man who lit the fuse. He runs European football. If you want the real story. The war behind the tournament. The fights happening off the pitch that shape everything on it. You're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell. This is Football Untold. We go where the cameras don't. June 14, 2026. Nothing about this date was supposed to matter. No massive match. No historic result. No record broken on a pitch somewhere. But it might end up being the most consequential single day of this entire World Cup. Because of 6 words spoken by one man. Alexander Čeferin, president of UEFA, the most powerful confederation in world football. A man with more institutional influence over the global game than almost any other human being alive. He looked at this World Cup, the biggest, most expanded, most globally inclusive tournament ever assembled, and reportedly said, there are a huge number of matches that are completely uninteresting. 6 words. Out loud. On record. And by nightfall, the tournament was on fire. Within hours of those comments resurfacing publicly, 13 football associations released a coordinated joint statement. Cape Verde, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Curaçao, Haiti, Jordan, Uzbekistan, Algeria, Egypt, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Morocco, Senegal, South Africa, Tunisia, 13 nations, one unified voice. Aimed directly at the top of European football. Now stop and look at exactly who is on that list. Because this is where it stops being politics and starts being something deeply personal. Cape Verde, Curaçao, Jordan, Uzbekistan, all 4 of those nations qualified for their very first World Cup in history this year. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Haiti hadn't been on this stage since 1974. More than 50 years of waiting, of qualifying heartbreaks, of watching everyone else from the outside. These aren't filler nations. These are countries writing the opening line of their World Cup story right now. In real time, this month, while you are watching. And the president of UEFA looked at their matches and called them completely uninteresting. The joint statement didn't use diplomatic language to soften the blow. It was direct. For these nations, there is no such thing as an unimportant World Cup match. Every player earned their place. Every coach sacrificed years to get there. Every supporter carries a dream that took decades to reach this moment. Calling any of that uninteresting isn't a bad taste comment from an official having a rough day. It lands as something far deeper than that. The 13 associations went further. They stated plainly that football does not belong to a select group of nations. That its power, its real, lasting power, comes entirely from being a truly global game. That every nation which qualifies deserves genuine respect, not a dismissive label from the man running the continent that has always assumed it owns football. That is not a press release. That is a line drawn in the ground. Here is what the headlines missed. Because this moment is about something much larger than one bad quote from one official. This is the public detonation of a tension that has been building inside football governance for years. Decades, even. European football's long, unspoken assumption of ownership over the game's identity, its standards, its definition of what counts as quality, what counts as interesting, what counts as worthy of being on the world stage. And on the other side, the growing, increasingly loud, increasingly unified voice of Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world saying, "We are done waiting for your permission to matter." The 13 nations said it directly. Football does not belong to a select group. Its strength is its universality. That is a challenge to a mindset that has shaped football governance for a century. And it was delivered not in a boardroom, but on the floor of an active World Cup, in front of the entire planet. Here is where this channel gives you both sides. Because that's what the story actually deserves. There is a real sporting argument underneath Čeferin's comments. Even if the delivery was catastrophic. Italian outlet Gazzetta dello Sport had already been making the case, before this controversy broke, that the expansion to 48 teams created visibly unbalanced matchups. That bigger does not automatically mean better, and that, in terms of how World Cup spots get distributed across confederations, Europe arguably came out at a disadvantage. Fewer slots relative to population and footballing depth. More group games against lower-ranked opposition. A format that critics say softens the relentless edge that made the old 32-team tournament feel electric from minute one. And buried inside what Čeferin reportedly said, underneath the headline that traveled everywhere, was a second part. He acknowledged that even smaller nations can show up, compete, and feel the pulse of the World Cup. That this, in his own words, is a big thing. Nobody heard that part. Because once the phrase completely uninteresting is out in the world, nothing you say around it matters. That is the only line people remember. That is the line that reached 13 nations and made them pick up their pens together. When UEFA was contacted for a response, they did not deny the comments. They pointed reporters to a separate interview that never even touched the subject of expansion. A denial. In the middle of a live tournament, with the whole world watching. That is not damage control. That is a match being dropped into dry grass. Forget the federation presidents for a moment. Forget the statements. Forget the politics. Picture an actual player from Curaçao, a nation of fewer than 200,000 people. Never been to a World Cup, not once, in their entire history. You have spent years grinding through the lower tiers of European club football. Not the glamour clubs, not the big stadiums, the real grind. Playing World Cup qualifiers in front of a few thousand fans, in stadiums that half empty on a good day, driven entirely by a dream most people told you was too big. And then it happens. You qualify. First time ever. You are going to the World Cup. Curaçao walked onto that pitch and lost to Germany 7-1. That is a brutal scoreline. Nobody is pretending otherwise. But was that match uninteresting? Not to the players who left everything they had on that pitch against one of the greatest footballing nations in history. Not to the people in Willemstad who stayed awake until 3 in the morning to watch their flag on the same screen as Germany's. Not to the kids across that island who will grow up knowing their national team stood on the biggest stage in football and competed. The counter from European football asks whether those national moments are worth restructuring a global tour for one else. That is a fair question to ask. But asking it in public. We bought upon us in public. Mid-tournament, through the mouth of UEFA's president. In language that reached global media within hours. That is an entirely different conversation. And it is one that Čeferin clearly did not think through before he spoke. There is one more layer to this story that connects every single thread together. This debate is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening inside a World Cup that arrived already carrying serious questions. Ticket prices ranging from $60 for group stage matches up to nearly $7,000 for the final. A dramatic jump from the previous tournament. And for the first time in World Cup history, FIFA introduced dynamic pricing, costs that shift in real time based on demand. Which means if neutral fans decide certain group matches are not worth the money, those tickets go unsold, seats sit empty, cameras catch the gaps. And suddenly the television picture is doing exactly what Čeferin warned about. Making the expanded format look like it cannot fill its own rooms. A match between two nations without large traveling fan bases. Inside a 60,000-seat stadium. In an American city where football is not even the dominant sport. That is a logistical problem. The 32-team format almost never faced at this frequency. But here is to answer nobody on the European side wants chair. Format had its own share of forgettable matches. A cautious 1-0 draw between two cynical European sides. Playing not to lose is not automatically more interesting than a debut nation throwing themselves at a powerhouse and losing with everything on the line. Interest is not objective. It never was. And applying a European definition of interesting to a tournament that belongs to the entire world is exactly the problem the 13 nations just called out. In public. Together, on the record, FIFA is now caught in the middle of something that does not resolve quietly. UEFA did not apologize. 13 nations did not back down. And this is now a public record dispute between European football's most powerful voice and half the continent that came to play. FIFA has to defend its own format, the one it sold to the world, against the looter of its most wholly commercially powerful confederation, while simultaneously protecting the smaller nations whose inclusion was the entire moral justification for expanding in the first place. And with FIFA already floating the idea of expanding even further in future tournaments, every empty seat and every lopsided scoreline becomes ammunition for those who want to roll this whole thing back. The best case from here, the football itself answers the critics. Upsets arrive. Debut nations steal moments. Drama fills the group stage in ways nobody predicted. Football has always had a way of silencing its doubters on the pitch. The worst case, the format delivers exactly what the critics feared. And the argument Čeferin made ends up looking correct, even though the way he made it was indefensible. Either way, this is not over. Not by a long way. What happened on June 14th was two completely different visions of what the World Cup is supposed to be. Crashing into each other at full speed, in front of the entire planet. With no referee in sight, one vision says the World Cup is a premium product. Quality matters. Standards exist. Expansion dilutes everything that made this tournament the greatest sporting event on Earth. The other says the World Cup belongs to the world. All of it. Not just the nations who have always owned it. And that watching Cape Verde, Jordan, or Curaçao make history for the first time is not a consolation prize. It is the entire point. The 13 nations closed their statement with a line worth holding on to. The growth of football must keep creating opportunity, inspiring new generations, and strengthening what makes this game truly global. That was the promise FIFA made when it expanded this tournament. Right now, mid-group stage, mid-controversy, mid-war, that promise is being tested live. So where do you land? Was Čeferin right? Does this format produce matches that genuinely do not belong on the world's biggest stage? Or does every debut nation deserve their moment, no matter the scoreline? And which first-time World Cup nation do you think pulls off the upset that shuts this whole debate down? Before the group stage ends, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this gave you the story behind the story, hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it means everything for this channel. Subscribe to Football Untold. Because, while everyone else covers the goals, we cover the war behind them. This World Cup is just getting started, and so is the reckoning. Football Untold. We tell it all.